Make it happen!
Back in 2000, General Motors entered the crossover market for the first time with one of their most daring and bizarre vehicles to date, the Pontiac Aztek.
New plan, baby. New Pontiac Aztek plan.
Intended for young drivers with active lifestyles, the Aztek offered several unique features that its target audience should have loved, but it was wrapped in a body that was so polarizing, it became the car design poster child for completely missing the mark. A year later, GM offered Buick their own crossover on the same platform, called the Rendezvous, which although wasn't pretty, its far less bizarre look made it Buick's most popular car and helped GM justify keeping the Aztek as long as it did, 5 years, with the Rendezvous lasting 2 more years. This is the story of the Pontiac Aztek. This is my old car.
How?
Well, first I had to find a Pontiac dealership, which wasn't easy.
If you saw my Weird GM Cars episode, you know that this car made it to number 2 on that list. I also made some top 10 lists of cars which were sales flops, but the Aztek wasn't included, since those lists feature luxury and sports cars, which of course the Aztek never was. Also, it's debatable to call it a flop anyway, since during its 5-year run, the Aztek sold almost 120,000 units, which in general isn't all that bad. But from the point of view of GM, it was a flop, as they forecast selling 75,000 units per year, and they needed to sell at least 30,000 each year to break even. The Aztek never sold more than 28,000 each year, but many who bought one defended it for all the unique features that no other car had, despite that the Aztek rode on GM's minivan platform, making it far from a true SUV. Prior to the year 2000, General Motors had a reputation for vehicles that maybe could be called boring, or more appropriately, not innovative. By the 90s, they definitely took some risks with cars like the 4th generation Chevy Caprice, so much so that I put that car at number 1 on my Weird GM car list. But excluding the Caprice, GM needed to shake its boring car reputation. GM CEO Rick Wagoner was quoted as saying back then that 40% of their cars needed to be innovative. Not only was that demand a bit too vague, I mean, what exactly is innovative? But it also was unusual in that 40% seems, at least to me, a low goal to achieve. Shouldn't they have wanted all of their cars to be innovative? The Aztek concept was first revealed to the public in 1999, and although you can clearly see the same design cues that made it to production, such as the double-stack grille, the public response wasn't all that bad. The chief stylist was Tom Peters, who would later head up the design of the C7 Corvette. Yes, you heard that right. The Aztek concept was in bright yellow, which would carry over as an option on the production car, but the more streamlined look of the concept was lost in production, thanks to the minivan platform that the execs at GM insisted the Aztek must use. Base Azteks also had the minivan's front-wheel drive, but an all-wheel drive option called VersaTrack was also available. When the production model was revealed to the press at the 2000 Detroit Auto Show,
The 2001 Pontiac Aztek!
Pontiac's marketing team staged a mosh pit with lots of young people with signs trying to draw attention to all the great features the car had. Even the head of Aztek's marketing jumped into the mosh pit and crowd surfed. Yes, that actually happened. Maybe they thought it would help keep people from looking at the car. Well, they did, and the reaction wasn't what they had hoped.
At its launch in 2000, they unveiled the first car, and the audience gasped and then laughed.
Believe it or not, Pontiac even convinced the Daytona 500 to have the Aztek be the pace car for the 2001 race. I can only imagine the looks on the faces of fans when they saw a 185 horsepower Aztek doing laps around the track. Not uncommon for Pontiac back then was lots of body cladding, and the Aztek took that to the extreme. Admittedly, for a car that was intended for younger, more outdoor activity-focused drivers, the body cladding sort of made sense, as it was more resistant to scratches than a clear coat of paint. But on the Aztek, the cladding initially only came in dull plastic gray. Although there were plenty of complaints about the look of the Aztek, changing the body cladding to be body colored was the cheapest and quickest. Although since the cladding was plastic, the paint color didn't always exactly match the same color on the rest of the car. Around the same time, Chevrolet released the Avalanche, which had similar cladding, and not surprisingly, it was later offered with the cladding removed. But the overdone body cladding was the least of the Aztek's faults. GM's direction for the Aztek was to be a design renaissance, and would break away from GM's more typical cautious approach to car design. The designers tried to make it look aggressive for the sake of being aggressive, and knew that its design wouldn't appeal to everyone, which sort of makes sense, since it was targeted for young people. But when GM forced them onto the existing minivan platform, the lower, more wagon-like stance of the concept became taller and boxier. The turn signals were placed on top of the fenders, and flanked the second set of grille openings above an oversized Pontiac-style grille. Out back, the glass had such a sharp bend in it that it forced the driver to look through a split window in the rear. Behind all the ugliness were several features that were quite clever, and those who did buy one often claimed these clever features helped convince them to get past the ugly. In fact, the Aztek had a very high customer satisfaction level. As some drivers said, you can't see how ugly it is from the driver's seat. Well, maybe except for those turn signals on the hood. Next to the driver's seat was a removable cooler, and the rear hatch was 2 separate doors, with the bottom opening like a truck tailgate, complete with cup holders. There was even an optional 10-speaker stereo with controls in the rear.
Life is indeed sweet.
And an optional heads-up display, high-tech for the time. A cargo tray riding on wheels could slide out over the tailgate, and the seat backs were designed to hold a removable camper's backpack. Speaking of camping, you could order a complete camper kit, which offered a built-in air compressor and a complete tent and air mattress kit. As if the car wasn't already weird looking, the addition of the tent on the open rear hatch took the weird look up a notch or two. Like most any other GM car, they planned to offer another model to share the platform. This other car was the Buick Rendezvous, and unlike GM's typical rebadges that looked very much alike, there was significant effort to make the Rendezvous be its own car. It still had the same overall shape, but in the rear was a more typical minivan style hatch, not the Aztek's split hatch. The Buick lacked the Aztek's outdoorsy features, but it also toned down all the styling, making the front end look less aggressive, and in turn less ugly. But the biggest advantage the Rendezvous had going for it was that it filled a gap in the Buick lineup for cars that had room for lots of cargo. Buick's last big car was the Roadmaster wagon, which ended its run in 1996, a consequence of Buick's aging customer base literally dying off, and fewer young people willing to own a Buick. The Rendezvous wasn't anywhere near as huge as the Roadmaster, but it was the only Buick at the time with a hatchback, which is a big advantage for hauling cargo, and its tall minivan shape was appreciated by families. It was a sales success for Buick, selling at least twice as many units each year as compared to the Aztek. The Rendezvous' success was likely a big contributor to Buick landing 2 more rebadges, the Rainier SUV in 2004 and the Terraza minivan in 2005. However, those 2 were much more obvious rebadges, and potential buyers weren't fooled, leading both to be canceled in 2007. As I noted earlier, the Aztek's first-year sales fell well below expectations, and although I could easily just say its ugliness turned off too many buyers, that wasn't the only reason. Although it shared GM's existing minivan platform, the rest of the design was all new, and GM needed to recoup that cost, with a selling price that was higher than their target buyer could afford. Unlike the Rendezvous, which offered 3 different V6s over the course of its run, the Aztek just offered the smallest of the 3, a 3.4-liter V6. But this version was also in many other models, and although it was far from quick, it had a decent enough reliability record at the time to avoid being another reason for people to hate it. After 2 years of not reaching sales expectations, the highest priced GT trim was dropped, and prices were dropped across the rest of the model line, making the Aztek even more of a money loser for Pontiac. They did also try a Rally Edition in 2003, which did no better, and in my opinion just added to the car's goofiness, since the only functional changes were a lowered front suspension, larger wheels, and a larger spoiler. Although the Aztek alone can't be blamed for Pontiac's overall losing sales in the 2000s, there were several industry analysts who believed the Aztek was the primary reason GM included Pontiac among all the brands it dropped during its bankruptcy, as the Aztek became such a punchline for ugly cars, and in turn ruined Pontiac's reputation. But in my opinion, Pontiac had been losing ground for years with most of their models being rebadged Chevys. If anything, the Aztek could have helped Pontiac gain new ground with a body style they never had before. The Aztek wouldn't be their only attempt at a new body, as the Pontiac Vibe wagon would probably be called a compact crossover today. Although the Aztek would later gain worldwide pop culture popularity on a different show that I'll discuss later, its first big break, so to speak, was landing a role on a new Fox sci-fi drama, Dark Angel, created by James Cameron. The show first premiered in October 2000, soon after the Aztek was available for public sale. The show was set in a post-apocalyptic 2019, and although the car itself wasn't the focus of the plot, I suspect Pontiac may have been involved in getting the car on the show. Within the show universe, the apocalypse happened in 2009, so maybe they thought the Aztek would represent how great Pontiac cars were, since they survived 10 years after an apocalypse. Or maybe the show producers liked it, because the Aztek had a weird kind of Mad Max vibe to it. During its first 3 model years, the Aztek sales remained flat, never going over the 30,000 units per year they needed to break even. Meanwhile, its cousin, the Rendezvous, was outselling the Aztek 2-1. An attempt to bring in some higher-end customers in 2004 was the Limited trim, which offered leather seats and aluminum interior, but sales continued to fall. By this point, sales across the entire Pontiac division weren't meeting expectations, and there were many in the auto industry who put the blame squarely on the Aztek. The Buick Rendezvous, on the other hand, continued to sell well enough to remain in production through 2007. But the entire Pontiac line was suffering for other reasons, such as the new GTO being a sales dud, the long-running Bonneville finally ending, and having no other SUV available. 2005 would be the final year of the Aztek, and with little funds to develop an all-new replacement, Pontiac instead opted to do what they typically did, rebadge a Chevy. Specifically, they rebadged the first-gen Equinox to become the Pontiac Torrent. Learning their lesson from the Aztek, the styling of the Torrent was far from objectionable. In fact, it swung the entire other way, and could be considered boring. But in its first model year, it sold nearly twice as well as the Aztek, but it dropped considerably by 2008, as GM neared bankruptcy, and rumors flew that Pontiac would soon be history. Despite the Aztek having been out of production for nearly 3 years, its reputation hadn't faded, and the makers of a new AMC drama called Breaking Bad thought the Aztek would be the perfect car for the show's lead character, Walter White. The Aztek's loser image was a perfect fit for White, a chemistry teacher who turns to making crystal meth to secure enough money for his family before he ultimately dies from lung cancer. The Aztek in the show was a unique drab shade of green that was created just for the show.
Vince wanted it to be this color. You'll never see another color like this on an Aztek except on Breaking Bad.
Besides the Aztek, the show would also make stars of other cars, such as the Chevrolet Monte Carlo, Toyota Tercel,
Can I actually get inside it?
You sure can. Let me give you the key.
Oh, perfect.
Chrysler 300, and the Chevy El Camino. After enough years pass, the Aztek managed to do what few field cars ever do, become cool. Although it's not like values have gone up, as sales of used models are still cheap, like around a couple grand or less. But owning one is worth it for those who love weird cars. You have to give GM some credit for taking a chance on a bizarre SUV design. Despite its failure, they continue to take chances with cars like the Chevy Avalanche and SSR. Pontiac sold nearly 120,000 Azteks over its 5-year run. That's not all bad for a car that most think was Pontiac's biggest flop.
But is the buying public really ready for Aztek? Well, ready or not, it's here.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 80s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.